these things. And you perhaps remember that conversation. He's asked, whose is the tribute money? Gave him a coin and asked him if he paid taxes. Whose is the tribute money? He's asked, he talks about the nature of the resurrection. What about a woman who had been married to 7 men in succession, childlessly, trying to have a child by the family? Who will be married to her in the resurrection? And he responds by telling them they don't understand the nature of the resurrection, and then showing them from the Pentateuch that there was a resurrection. He's asked in Matthew 22, which is the great commandment of the law? Which is the most important? And he tells them, loving God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself. Number 1 and number 2. The best summary of those 10 commandments that could be devised. But in addition, he gives 6 parables on this day. The first of them is the parable of the 2 sons. Matthew 21. There is also in Matthew 22, parable of the wedding feast. Remember that parable? Man who came in without the proper clothing, the wedding feast prepared, the guests invited wouldn't come. Lo and behold, he sent out into the highways and byways to find someone who would come. The parable of the 10 virgins, 5 wise and 5 foolish, 5 who had prepared for the coming of the bridegroom, 5 who were completely unprepared. And if you look at these parables, this is deadly to the Jewish mindset, their prejudices. It was tearing them apart. The parable of the talents. The man who had 10 talents, the man who had 5, the man who had 1 and buried his talent. He gave the parable of the division of the sheep from the goats. There was going to be a judgment. All this on Tuesday. And finally, in the great parable that probably resulted in his real death, a parable, you know, the Lord said that to some people it wasn't given to understand the parable, but this one was so specific and so aimed at the Jewish rulers that they couldn't escape. The parable of the wicked husbandman, found in all 3 of the synoptic gospels. In Luke 20, they cast him out of the vineyard, Jesus said. The son they had cast out of the vineyard and killed him. After having killed those who were sent to him in several instances, what therefore shall the Lord of the vineyard do unto them? He shall come and destroy these husbandmen, and shall give the vineyard to others. And when they heard it, they said, God forbid. He beheld them and said, what is this then that is written? The stone which the builders rejected, the same is become the head of the corner. Whosoever shall fall upon that stone shall be broken, but on whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him to powder. And the chief priests and scribes knew it was aimed at them. The same hour sought to lay hands on him, for they feared the people. For they perceived that he had spoken this parable against them. This one, there was no mistaking who he was talking about. They couldn't escape it. But after that busy, busy day on Wednesday, he sought comfort at Bethany. This was roughly the route. It really wasn't terribly far, as you can see. Let me see. We can pick out 1 or 2 items here on the map. Let's see. We can get everything working here. You can see Jerusalem over here, the rough site of the temple, the valley that separated Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives up in here, where Jesus spent much time. And the road wrapping around, coming over this next valley, and lo and behold, ending up here at Bethany, the house of Martha, in that place. And some artist has suggested that maybe this was the house at some time or another. That needs to be considered. And there, we read about it in a couple of places in the Scriptures. If you'd like to turn with me to Mark 14, we'll have our lesson. Being in Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at meat, there came a woman having an alabaster box of ointment of spikenard, very precious. And she broke the box and poured it on his head. And there were some that had indignation within themselves and said, "Why was this waste of the ointment made? It might have been sold for more than 300 pence and have been given to the poor." They murmured against her, and Jesus said, "Let her alone. Why trouble ye her? She hath wrought a good work on me, for ye have the poor with you always. And whensoever ye will, ye may do them good. But me ye have not always." She had done what she could. She's come aforehand to anoint my body to the burying. Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached throughout the whole world, this also that she have done shall be a memorial of her. The account also appears in John 12. Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead, there they made him a supper, and Martha served. Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with him, had just been raised from the dead. Then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Mary did this. Think about that alabaster box. They would wear these bottles, around their neck, oftentimes, to refresh themselves. It was hot. They didn't bathe constantly. And so it would be a refreshment, as is indicated in some passages. Those alabaster boxes had a purpose. They used the perfume, as I say, to refresh themselves. Sometimes it was worn in a small vial around their neck. They also had the habit of breaking a goblet from which an important man drank. They wouldn't want lips to touch that ever again. This talks about, this is the silver penny or denarius of Tiberius. You see the alabaster box and its purposes. If you thought about the value of that box and what was in it. In Mark 14, we read, it might have been sold for more than 300 pence. Pence doesn't sound much, does it? But the word used there is the word denarius. And a denarius was a day's wages for the average working man in Palestine. Let that sink in just a minute. So that what you're talking about is that 300 denarii was a year's salary for the average man. I was looking at some figures the other day. It said the average wage, sorry if you're not making this much, congratulations if you're making more, the average family in the U.S. now, I assume that combines husband and wife, makes $54,000 a year. So this was worth, if it were in the U.S. and if it were today, $50,000. She broke it and poured it on Jesus' feet. Now that sort of changes things, doesn't it? Somebody, Judas, we find out, grumbled about it. As you look at that, its value, it might have been sold for more than 300 pence. Philip answered him, 200 penny worth of bread in John 6, 200 denarii is not sufficient for 5,000 people. Now just think about it. After church here, you take off, you head for McDonald's. And you say, come on, all of you, I'm going to pay at McDonald's. And you pick up 3 or 4 more churches on your way. So we're going to pay for 5,000 of you at McDonald's. How much would that cost? He said 200 denarii wouldn't quite be enough for 5,000 people. This was 300 denarii. It was more than enough to feed 5,000 people. 200 denarii, therefore, would have provided a light snack for 5,000 people, whereas 3,000 would have bought them a dinner down here at Red Lobster. I just put a name in your mind, and all of you will head for Red Lobster today. It was an enormous amount of money. Jesus makes three answers to this charge. He says, you have the poor always with you. He says, she's anointed me for burial. And he says, what she's done will always be remembered. You need to realize that there are certain lessons from the love this woman showed. There is a certain extravagance in love. It's there. This woman was being extravagant. Well, Amanda, you would probably have accepted a ring from Daniel if it were just an old can top from a Pepsi, right? Been wearing that the rest of your life. Cheap bum. But I suspect that wouldn't have been enough for him, because he isn't a cheap bum, and because he does claim that he loves you dearly. And so he wanted to express it. Well, how you do it? You know, after all, the ring that he gave you, that engagement ring, is just a chunk of metal, not very big. And it's just got some rocks in it. It's no big deal. But I bet he's probably still making payments on it. Have you paid it off yet, Dave? Oh, well, you're free to go now. But it's a lot of money. Woo! I remember going to my friend who was a jeweler, and I had $100. And I was thinking about this. My friend, he was a jeweler, set diamonds and rings, and he took me down in his basement one time where he did a lot of work, and he poured out a fistful of rubies and emeralds and diamonds, and they were all broken. He had messed those up. I said, look, I got $100, and that was a lot of money to me. I'd saved for a long time to come up with $100. I was getting paid $50 a week as a preacher, and probably that was more than I was worth. And just paying my rent and all that sort of thing out of that, so it took me a while. But he sent me a ring that my wife has enjoyed now for a long time. She lost the stone out of it. And so since this year was our 50th anniversary, I told her, I said, give me that ring. She still had the ring. I said, I'll go buy the stone for that. Actually, I didn't quite tell her that. There was a lot of confusion. So anyway, I went out to this jeweler. You know, they charge more money now. My goodness. They multiplied my pitiful little $100 by several times. But it made her. And that's really all that matters. There's an extravagance in love. You do that all the time. Every now and then, someone dies. And I don't know what to say. You know, they always want me to preach it, you know, and I struggle to come up with something to say. But I suppose all of you are in the same thing. Oh, what do we say other than sorry? And so we have the tradition, Rita, of sending flowers. You know, goodness, those flowers, you don't just go pick them up out of somebody's garden and mail them in. They cost a lot of money too. Why do you do that? And every now and then I've seen somebody says, who grumbles about, oh my, that was too expensive. We shouldn't do that. What a waste. Why? How do we express sympathy? Except that there's an extravagance to love. That's the nature of the thing. There's an extravagance to it. And the Lord taught us that. In Romans 5 and verse 8, God commendeth his love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Have you ever thought about the extravagance of the love that God expressed for us? God so loved this world that he gave his only begotten Son. Oh, goodness, why didn't he get one of those angels? And not one of the good angels, one of them that's kind of, the stupid, and send him down here. But he didn't. He sent his own Son, his only Son. Why? There's an extravagance in love. That whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. John 15 and verse 13, greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Why do we celebrate these people who go off to war and come home in a box? Because we realize that they and their family made that great sacrifice of love for us and for the service of our country. But in addition, love knows that there are certain moments in life which come and never come back. It's just going to be this time. It's just this time. Can you think of some of those? Maybe when you took your son out, or your grandson, and caught his first fish, like a little fish. It'll be hard pressed to eat that thing. He will remember that stupid fish all of his life, just like I remember my grandmother taking me out to a little creek. After she spun the line, she had to use string, not that fancy nylon stuff. We couldn't afford that. She used string and braided it 3 times. And a hook. And he cut off a branch for me, and we went out and fished in that creek. And I caught sunfish. And I was the proudest thing in the world. That moment comes and it ain't coming back. You'll learn to fish 1,000 other times, just like I have. Remember that one. That time when you see your dad or your granddad, that time isn't coming back. You need to think about it. When do you get married? You make such a big falderall about that. No. You're going to do that once. It's never going to come back again. So you spend money on people to take pictures, and you'd like her dressed pretty, as well as she could be. You can get married in an old lousy shift, but want to look good and remember this moment. That moment when your kid played, goodness gracious, T-ball is a punishment. We all have to go out and watch T-ball. Why we watch our grandkid out in the outfield looking the other way or playing in the dirt. And we all take pictures of him. But why do we do that? Because we know he's never going to be in T-ball again. This is one time. The moment you took a walk, the moment you talked to that baby, You know, I've seen you people put pictures on, and you'll put pictures of all the women in the family, 4 or 5 generations when you get them together. Why do you do that? You know, you may not get all 5 of those generations together again. That moment may come, may never come again. The Lord said, Galatians 4, when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law. Why did God wait 4,000 years to send Jesus? But for just exactly the right moment. And you goofy men have done the same thing. You wanted to propose to your wife. Well, you didn't just throw an old softball at her with it, did you? You waited and you planned and you wrote poetry. Oh my goodness. That you hope is destroyed now. No, Rick never would write poetry. I bet he did something else. In fact, I was there, sort of, when you got married. You did other stuff. Because we want the moments to be the right moments. And to remember, the Lord did the same thing. The Lord, though, has such a wonderful opportunity. Beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. The Lord has the ability to plan a thing for a long time. And he has the ability, I plan things and I picked the wrong time, the wrong moment, and it just all didn't work. The Lord has the ability to see the end with the beginning. He can use that telescope both ways. Have you kids ever done that with somebody gives you a pair of binoculars and you look through the little end and everything's bigger and close up. Every kid I know of turned those binoculars around, looked through the other way, and it was different. Everything was a little bitty. It was like a magnifying glass. God can do that. He can see 1,000 years back and plan a thing and hold the event. One day is as 1,000 years. And he can see how it's going to end up 1,000 years from now. But you can't. You only have this moment. Haven't there been days like that in your life where you wished you could stretch them out and make them last? In a few weeks, I remember like this, a lot of trees. No thanks to my son and wife, would cut down everything to make a desert. But there's a lot of trees. And in the fall, all those trees turn a host of colors. And they drop their leaves on the ground. And before we can rake them up on those golden fall days, with the sun coming through those trees, now full bore because the leaves are falling off, it's a golden, beautiful carpet. And it's a warm day in the fall before winter, and you just wish you could stretch that day out and make it last. Don't you wish you could do that? The Lord can. One day is as 1,000 years. And the opposite side of it, 1,000 years as one day. He can plan. And he can see the end with the beginning. Isn't that wonderful? He can see the end with the beginning. He can stretch the day out into tomorrow. You and I can't. And so, love knows there's certain times that come, and they're not coming back. We are so busy with stuff. We're so busy with our jobs, and we're so busy with our education. Sometimes we forget our wife. Sometimes we forget our kids. And there are moments that are passing for our wife and our kids that you're not going to get back. Maybe that job doesn't mean that much. Maybe that career doesn't need that much furtherance. Maybe you could skip a day of school. You need to think about those things. But thirdly, love puts into the world a fragrance that time cannot obliterate. Okay. These are variegated carnations. Okay? I'll tell you, look, a lot of the older people have heard me tell this story, so I'm going to tell it to you. When I was younger, quite a bit, I met this beautiful, black-haired, dark-eyed woman who I was fascinated by and in love with. And she could kind of take or leave me. And so what I did on my $50 a week is I went down to my local florist and I said, look, I will give you my entire paycheck for 6 months if you will give me a bouquet of flowers every day. And I liked variegated carnations, and I said, that's what I want. And so every day, I think for 6 months, I was thinner than I've ever been in my life. I gave the lady who's now my wife a bouquet of variegated carnations. Her house smelled like the funeral. Her mother thought I was crazy. Did to her dying day. Well, crazy is really the nice thing she thought of me. But anyway. But to this day, all I have to do with my wife is bring her one variegated carnation, and the fragrance brings all that back. It's there. You can't take it away anymore. It's cemented in her brain and mine. Love does that. It puts into the world that memory. And so in Luke 10, verse 41, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things, but one thing is needful. And Mary hath chosen that good part, which shall not be taken away from her. Jesus said, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away. This was not going to fade. It wasn't going to be done away. It wasn't going to be forgotten. Love put into the world a fragrance that's not going to go away. In the face of death, Jesus was confident of ultimate vindication. Have you noticed what she says? He says to her, he says, verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached throughout the whole world. He was confident it was going into the whole world. He was confident it was going to be preached. This that she had done, this small thing, shall be spoken of for a memorial of her. You mean it's not going to just all be forgotten and wiped out? No. Her memorial was a memorial of healing. Now, my friends, this morning, this woman loved Jesus and would have done anything for him. He asks you to believe in him as she did, to turn from your sins as she did, to confess him as she did, and to be baptized as she did. If you're here this morning and you're not a Christian, Come on, stand and sing.